We're often drawn to those sprawling, almost mythical international crime syndicates we see in movies.
Right.
Big famous names.
Right. The ones everyone knows.
Exactly. But sometimes the real intrigue lies in the, well, less overtly famous groups, the ones weaving these incredibly complex and really far-reaching webs of illicit activity. Today, you and I are diving deep into just such a case.
The Abergil organization. Think of them as a, I guess, fascinating if disturbing study in contrasts.
Oh, so?
Well, you have this alleged extreme violence existing right alongside a surprisingly sophisticated approach to building a criminal enterprise. One that apparently touched everything from, like, everyday car theft to some really significant international operations.
Exactly, and that's key. This wasn't just some localized operation. The information we have paints a picture of a criminal entity with connections stretching, across continents.
Wow.
Yeah, reportedly involved in a truly staggering array of illegal activities. Our goal in this deep dive is to understand, based on the information available, the nuts and bolts of this organization, like its structure.
Yeah, its structure, what exactly they were allegedly doing, and the kind of impact they had both regionally and internationally.
Okay. And to do that, we've compiled a pretty substantial amount of information, right? We're looking at the organization's origins, the key players involved.
Details from legal proceedings, too, in both Israel and the U.S.
Right, and various news reports that have tracked their alleged activities over the years. What we want to give you, the listener, is a clear understanding of the crucial aspects, those moments where, everything kind of clicks into place.
Without getting bogged down.
Exactly, without overwhelming you with every single tiny detail. So, ready to get into it?
Absolutely. Let's start at the beginning. How did this organization even come to be?
Okay, so let's unpack this. The Abergil organization, according to the sources, is an Israeli crime syndicate. Really rose to prominence in the late 20th, early 21st century.
Founded in the 90s, I believe.
Yeah, founded in the 1990s in Ramat Gan, Israel. And the individuals behind it were these brothers, Yaakov, Avi, and Yitzhak Abergil.
And their background was Moroccan Jewish origin, right? That's mentioned.
That's right, yeah. Their primary area of operation was mainly Tel Aviv, but like we said, the info suggests a much broader alleged presence throughout Israel and even internationally, U.S., other countries.
And the sources specifically note their ethnicity as Jews of Moroccan Jewish ancestry.
What's interesting to consider there, I think, is that while their base was in Israel, their alleged rapid expansion internationally. That points to a key characteristic of modern organized crime, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The ability to transcend geographical borders relatively quickly. The mention of their specific ethnic background in the sources might shed light on their maybe initial connections and networks.
Sure, who they knew first.
Exactly. But it's clear their activity soon extended far beyond those initial ties.
Right. And when we talk about what those activities were, the list is remarkably broad.
Yeah, it covers a lot of ground.
We're talking things like car theft, conspiracy, drug trafficking, which seems central, really.
Definitely a core element.
Embezzlement, extortion, gambling, loan sharking, money laundering, and pretty disturbingly, murder and racketeering. It really does seem to cover the full spectrum of serious organized crime.
That kind of diversification, well, it's often a hallmark of a well-established and a frankly powerful criminal group.
Why is that?
By engaging in multiple types of crime, they reduce their vulnerability, If law enforcement cracks down in one area, they have other income streams.
Okay. Don't put all your illegal eggs in one basket.
Pretty much. And this interconnectedness is key to their resilience. For instance, profits from drug trafficking can be used to finance other operations, like money laundering.
Which then helps them buy assets.
Exactly. Acquire assets and further expand their reach. It feeds itself.
That makes sense, like a portfolio of illegal activities. But what really stands out in the information we have is their alleged signature tactic, the use of violence.
Yeah.
Violence to maintain control.
Exactly. The sources repeatedly highlight their reputation for, well, ruthless tactics, their alleged involvement in a significant number of violent crimes and murders.
It paints a pretty brutal picture.
It does. An organization that was apparently not hesitant to use extreme force to achieve its aims and to discourage any challenges to their authority.
Yet, alongside this alleged brutality, the sources also point to a sophisticated side. They reportedly had a complex organizational structure.
Right, and that likely played a crucial role in their ability to operate internationally. It wasn't just about muscle, there was apparently a significant level of planning and strategic thinking involved.
So structure meets violence.
Precisely. The complexity of their structure allowed them to coordinate activities across different regions and, importantly, to insulate the leadership from some of the more street-level operations.
Huh. Keep the bosses clean, so to speak.
That kind of hierarchical organization is typical of larger, more successful criminal enterprises.
So who are the central figures in this alleged organization? We've mentioned the founding brothers already, Yaakov, Avi, and Yitzhak Abergil.
The core.
But the information also names others. Let's see, Abraham, also known as Ebi Abergil, Meir Abergil, Ishai, or Shai Fima, Moti Hassan.
And then some less Israeli-sounding names, too.
Yeah, exactly. Arnold Belomo and Viktor Strelnikov. Those last two certainly suggest the international connections we were just talking about.
That list of names really highlights the interconnected nature of these global criminal networks, doesn't it?
It does.
While the Abergil brothers were at the core, the presence of names like Belomo and Strelnikov indicates the alliances and partnerships they likely forged, to facilitate their various operations, particularly on an international level.
Makes sense. You need local contacts for things like
cross-border drug trafficking, money laundering. Absolutely. These connections are vital.
Okay, speaking of connections, what about alliances and rivals? Our information points to at least one specific ally. The Vineland Boys. Ever hear of them?
Yeah, a U.S.-based group. And on the flip side, they definitely had rivals.
Oh, yeah. And that list includes some pretty significant players. The Mexican Mafia, the Aryan Brotherhood.
Wow, big names in the U.S. prison and street gang scene.
Definitely. And various gangs within Israel itself, including the Abergil family, the Abergil Crime Organization, and a guy named Zeev Rosenstein.
Rosenstein, yeah. That name comes up again.
I suspect we'll hear more about him later, yeah.
Absolutely. In the world of organized crime, the landscape is constantly shifting. It's all about who you're allied with and who you're, fighting with.
Right.
The fact that the Abergil organization had both powerful allies and significant rivals, that indicates their established and probably contested position within that underworld.
And the mix of international and local rivals just reinforces that broad operational footprint again.
Exactly.
Okay, so it seems by the early 2000s, the Abergil organization had definitely caught the attention of law enforcement. Big time. Both in Israel and the U.S.
Yeah, things started heating up then.
The sources detail a series of arrests and extraditions involving the Abergil brothers. Let's start with Yaakov Abergil. He was arrested in Israel back in 2005.
Right, and then extradited to the U.S.
Yeah, extradited, convicted of drug trafficking, and got a pretty substantial sentence, 32 years in prison.
That was undoubtedly a significant blow. Took one of the founders off the board, essentially.
For sure. Then, several years later, 2008, Adi Abergil was also arrested in Israel.
And extradited, too.
Yep, extradited to the U.S. He faced charges related to drug trafficking and money laundering, eventually pleaded guilty, and got 10 years.
Okay, so another brother down.
And then there's Yitzhak Abergil. His case is particularly notable, reached a major conclusion much later, in 2021.
This was case 512, right?
That's the one. He was convicted in Israel in what was described as one of the country's largest criminal trials.
Huge case.
And the charges were incredibly serious. 3 counts of murder, heading a criminal organization, numerous other crimes. Then in 2022, the sentence came down.
And it was heavy.
Extremely. 3 life sentences plus an additional 30 years. It's a pretty definitive outcome.
Yeah.
Really highlights the severity of his alleged actions in the eyes of the Israeli legal system.
It certainly does. The fact that case 512 is called one of Israel's largest criminal trials, that just underscores the sheer scale and impact of Yitzhak Abergil's alleged criminal enterprise.
And the effort involved in bringing him to justice.
Absolutely. Those multiple life sentences clearly indicate the gravity of the crimes he was convicted of.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and delve into the financial side. Because an organization operating at this level, it's not just about violence, right? There's got to be money.
Always follow the money.
Exactly. The sources give us some interesting insights. At their peak, around June 2004, the Israeli police estimated their assets in Israel alone to be in the tens of millions of shekels.
Wow. And what did that include?
A significant portfolio. 37 companies, 38 apartments, and 56 cars. It's considerable wealth.
Absolutely. That snapshot provides a tangible sense of the financial power they allegedly commanded. But their operations weren't just limited to Israel, were they?
No, not at all. The indictment against them also details this purported money laundering operation in the U.S. Ran from 2002 to 2006, apparently.
And we're talking big money.
Tens of millions of US dollars, allegedly, money embezzled from the Israel Trade Bank. This was reportedly connected to the extortion of a guy named Ofer Maximoff.
Which then led to his sister, Edialon, committing that massive embezzlement. Right, I remember that connection.
Yeah, that whole scandal. The Jerusalem gang is also mentioned in this context somehow.
It's all connected. So they allegedly laundered this embezzled money. Then what?
Well, this laundered money was then allegedly used in a loan scheme targeting Israeli business people in the United States.
Loaning out dirty money. Classic loan sharking tactics.
Pretty much. And if these individuals couldn't repay the loans, well, they were allegedly subjected to extortion, sometimes even lost their businesses.
Nasty stuff. And who was supposedly running this side of things?
The source points to Meir Abergil, supposedly in charge of the finances, overseeing the collection, laundering, and investment of these illicit funds.
So Meir was the money guy.
It seems like it. And it appears they had a network in place to manage this in the U.S. Gabi Ben Harush, mentioned earlier with the Jerusalem gang, is said to have run the lending operation stateside, kept in contact with Meir and Yitzhak.
Okay, so Ben Harosh handles the U.S. lending.
Then you have Sasson Barashi and Hai Vaknin. They allegedly identified potential borrowers and handled the often brutal task of collecting the money when loans went unpaid.
The enforcers.
Basically. The source even mentions a Yoram Elal, supposedly involved in special operations, who then fled to Brazil.
And there's evidence for this. It's not just hearsay.
Well, the sources cite surveillance reports, photographs, and recorded phone conversations as evidence. So it wasn't just speculation, apparently.
Right. That paints a very detailed picture of how this alleged operation functioned, like you said, a shadow banking system.
With violent consequences for non-payment, yeah. And it seems the U.S. authorities had their own take on the Abergils' reach. The U.S. State Department reportedly considered them among the world's top 40 drug importers to the U.S.
Top 40. That is staggering. It truly highlights the scale of their alleged drug trafficking activities.
And the impact on the international drug trade, presumably.
No doubt. And to expand their drug distribution network in the U.S., they reportedly teamed up with that Latino street gang we mentioned, the Vineland Boys.
Right, the ally.
Apparently, the Vineland Boys were looking for a new drug supplier because they were feuding with the Mexican Mafia, La Emma.
Ah, so the Abergils saw an opportunity.
Allegedly, yeah. They stepped in to fill that void. It shows a kind of strategic move, capitalizing on existing rivalries within the U.S. criminal landscape.
That's a classic example, isn't it?
Right.
Criminal alliances forged out of shared interests, shared enemies, opportunities.
Exactly. The sources also mention charges against the Abergils, along with Moshe Malul and Israel Ozifa, for allegedly smuggling cocaine and hashish from Europe into the U.S.
So multiple types of drugs, multiple routes.
And their alleged involvement in the ecstasy trade seems to have been particularly significant.
How so?
There was a big bust in 2002. Los Angeles Police Department raided an alleged ecstasy dealer meeting, seized over 400,000 tablets.
Wow, 400,000. What's that worth?
Estimated street value over $5 million back then.
Okay. And the Abergils were linked.
Law enforcement reportedly identified Moshe Malul as the central figure in the distribution network in Southern California, with Yitzhak Abergil allegedly responsible for orchestrating the shipments coming in from Belgium and the Netherlands.
So Yitzhak coordinating from Europe, Malul distributing in L.A.
That seems to be the picture painted by the authorities, yeah. And Yitzhak Abergil's drug trafficking wasn't solely focused on the U.S. either.
Oh, where else?
In 2008, a court in Antwerp, Belgium, sentenced him to 5 years in prison for large-scale drug trafficking through the port there.
Antwerp, yeah, major European port. That just underscores the truly international scope of their alleged operations, doesn't it?
Exactly. The Antwerp conviction reinforces that idea. Their drug trafficking was apparently a significant, multifaceted aspect of their alleged criminal enterprise, spanning multiple countries and legal systems.
Okay, now, we really can't discuss the Abergil organization without circling back to that pervasive theme of violence.
It's unavoidable.
In June 2002, Yaakov Abergil, one of the founding brothers, was murdered.
Right, the first brother to fall.
Following his death, leadership reportedly passed to Yitzhak, who, according to the sources, had already accumulated numerous enemies and was himself the target of several assassination attempts.
A dangerous position to be in.
No kidding. In fact, just a few months later, December 2002, one of their main rivals, Zeev Rosenstein,
Him again.
was arrested on suspicion of plotting to assassinate both Yitzhak and the already deceased Yakov.
Wow. Plotting against a dead man, too. That's cold. But it really underscores the intense, volatile environment they operated in.
Definitely. And the threats weren't just internal to Israel. In 2007, authorities reportedly got intel about contract killers,
From where?
believed to be from the Commonwealth of Independent States, so former Soviet republics, allegedly hired by a rival crime family thought to be the Alperons as part of an ongoing bloody feud.
So bringing in international hitmen, that escalates things.
For sure. The sources then detail several specific instances of violence allegedly linked to the Abergil organization. There's the murder of Sammy Atias in 2003,
What was the alleged reason for that?
reportedly because he stole a large quantity of ecstasy from them.
Stealing from the mob rarely ends well.
Seems not. Moshe Malo and a member of the Vineland Boys were reportedly present at the scene, although another individual is said to have actually pulled the trigger.
Okay. And Yitzhak's involvement.
Interestingly, Yitzhak Abergil allegedly offered to help with the killing during a meeting in Spain, even though he wasn't physically there when it happened.
That detail, his alleged remote involvement, it speaks volumes, doesn't it, about the level of control and influence he supposedly had over the organization's violence.
Even when not directly participating. Like, his directives carried serious weight.
Exactly. Suggests that hierarchical structure we talked about.
Then we have this incident in 2008. Two suspected associates were acquitted well, on lesser charges, or apparently due to police negligence, but they had allegedly plotted to kill Nissim Alperon.
One of the rival Alperon family members.
Right, in retaliation for an attack on Yitzhak Abergil. But here's the striking part. Just a month after this acquittal, in November 2008, Yakov Alperon, another key figure in that family, was killed.
How?
Car bomb explosion in Tel Aviv.
Wow. And was that linked back to the Abergils?
The sources here don't definitively say so, but I mean,
Yeah.
the timing, the ongoing intense rivalry between the families, it certainly raises questions, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The sequence of events, the planned retaliation, then the violent death of a rival family member so soon after strongly suggests a pattern. Retaliatory violence seems to have characterized the interactions between these groups.
And tragically, it wasn't just rivals getting hurt. Innocent people got caught in the middle.
Yeah, that's the awful part of these gang wars.
In 2005, two young girls were killed in Ramelow. They were hit by gunfire directed at a hall where Yitzhak Abergil was celebrating something.
Oh, it's terrible.
Law enforcement believe they were unintended victims, a tragic case of mistaken identity or just bullets flying indiscriminately.
Those incidents are just a stark, heartbreaking reminder of the indiscriminate nature of this kind of violence. It's not just rival targeting rival. Innocent bystanders often become casualties.
And then there's the particularly disturbing murder in 2008. A social worker, Margarita Laughton, in Bat Yam.
What happened there?
She was just dining with her family, caught in the crossfire of an attempted assassination of a guy named Rami Amira. He was sitting nearby with Modi Hassan and Simantov Matayeb, all reportedly connected to the Abergil group.
So another targeted hit gone wrong, killing an innocent person.
Exactly. And the two individuals eventually convicted of her murder were identified as members of the Abergil organization. One got life, the other 7 years.
The murder of Margarita Laughton, it just underscores the profound human cost of these criminal enterprises. An innocent person, a social worker, out with her family, becomes a victim.
It's awful. And the fact that the perpetrators were ID'd as Abergil members just solidifies their alleged involvement in these violent acts. The consequences ripple out.
Sadly, the violence didn't end there, did it? What happened to Rami Amira, the intended target in that shooting?
He was eventually murdered too.
Yeah.
In Rishon LeZion in 2011. Police sources indicated it was presumably by the Abergil organization.
So they eventually got their target, years later.
Seems like it. Suggests a kind of sustained, relentless pursuit of those they considered enemies.
That indicates a long-term commitment to retribution, settling scores. Even after key figures were facing major legal challenges, it speaks to a culture of violence, a determination to maintain dominance through force.
Okay, let's shift back to the law enforcement side of things. We mentioned Gabby Ben-Harosh being arrested in L.A. back in 2004.
Right, the guy allegedly running the U.S. loan operation.
He eventually took a plea bargain for lesser offenses. And it's believed U.S. authorities tried, but failed, to get him to flip, to give incriminating info against the Abergils.
Yeah, that highlights the difficulty, doesn't it? Penetrating these tightly knit organizations, getting people to talk.
The code of silence, or maybe just fear.
That's a common challenge in prosecuting organized crime, getting lower-level members to cooperate against the bosses. The fact Ben-Harosh apparently didn't, Suggests either loyalty or, like you said, fear of retaliation, or both.
Then there was Hai Vaknin, described as an Abergil henchman. He was arrested in the U.S. in 2006.
Did he cooperate?
He did eventually. Reached a plea agreement in 2011, confessed to money laundering, got sentenced to time served, basically.
And his testimony.
It was expected to be used against Yitzhak and Meir Abergil. So maybe a crack in that wall of silence after all.
Vaknin's decision to cooperate likely provided valuable inside information to the prosecution, especially on the financial side. That kind of testimony can be crucial.
Definitely. Then came the really big arrests. August 2008. Yitzhak and Meir Abergil themselves arrested in Israel.
In connection with
The Margarita Laughton murder, initially. But shortly after, they appeared in a Jerusalem court along with Moshe Malol, Israel Ozifa, and Sison Barashi.
Why?
Because U.S. authorities had requested their extradition in connection with that 2003 murder of Sammy Attias, the guy who allegedly stole the ecstasy.
So the U.S. wanted them for crimes committed there or linked there.
Exactly. The U.S. indictment against Yitzhak Abergil was extensive. Murder, ecstasy trafficking, extortion, violence, money laundering, the works.
And this came after a long investigation.
Huge investigation, spanning 6 years, involving law enforcement agencies in over 10 countries. That really underscores the global effort needed to tackle this.
The sheer scale and duration of that investigation, the international collaboration, it highlights the global reach of the Abergil organization's alleged activities and the commitment of authorities to try and dismantle it.
The legal process for extradition itself was lengthy, though. The Jerusalem District Court approved it in July 2009.
But they appealed, right?
They did. The Abergils and their associates appealed to the Israeli Supreme Court, which ultimately rejected their appeals in December 2010. That cleared the way for them to be sent to the U.S.
That protracted legal battle is pretty typical in extradition cases. People facing serious charges usually exhaust every legal avenue to avoid prosecution elsewhere. The Supreme Court's final decision was a big step for the U.S. authorities.
So January 2011, it finally happens. Yitzhak and Meir Abergil, Sison Barashi, Moshe Malol, and Israel Uzifa are all extradited to Los Angeles.
Facing that massive federal indictment.
77 pages long, apparently.
Yeah.
Huge list of charges. But there was an interesting agreement.
What was that?
The U.S. gave assurances to Israel. Even if convicted of murder, they wouldn't face the death penalty, and they'd likely serve any prison sentences back in Israel.
That makes sense. That assurance regarding the death penalty was likely crucial for Israel to agree to the extradition, given their opposition to capital punishment.
Probably. And then, shortly after they arrived in the U.S., another chilling detail.
Yeah.
A threatening letter was discovered. Just underscores the potential for continued intimidation, violence.
A stark reminder of the dangerous nature of these individuals and the whole environment surrounding them.
Despite all this, Meir Abergil, he seemed to downplay their significance. In an Israeli TV interview, he famously dismissed their organization as, like, peanuts compared to American mafias, called them cockroaches.
Huh. That kind of bravado or denial isn't uncommon, is it? Could be an attempt to minimize their perceived power, maybe for strategic reasons or just ego, trying to control the narrative.
Maybe. Now, even after these key figures were extradited, Israeli police believed the Abergil organization kept operating in Israel.
Who took over, allegedly?
Modi Hassan apparently stepped into a leadership role. He was arrested in 2012 himself in connection with several gangland killings, so the activity continued. Furthermore, also in 2012, 5 alleged members were arrested in Jerusalem. They had a significant cache of weapons, and they claimed they were storing them on Yitzhak Abergil's advice.
From prison, or before he was sentenced.
It implies even while facing legal proceedings abroad, possibly even after a conviction, he might have still been exerting influence back home.
That continuation of activity, the alleged instructions from Yitzhak, it really highlights the challenge in completely dismantling these well-established organizations, even with leaders locked up.
Yeah, there are always structures, people ready to fill the void or follow old orders.
Exactly.
What about Meir Abergil, the alleged finance guy? What happened to him in the U.S.?
He was eventually released and returned to Israel in August 2011, reached a plea agreement in the U.S. related to extortion charges.
But he got out relatively quickly.
Seems so. But he still faced pending charges back in Israel concerning an internet gambling business. So, still tangled in legal issues across different places.
It shows how complex these international cases get. You can face charges in multiple countries for different things.
Absolutely. Multifaceted outcomes.
Okay, and the others extradited to the U.S. What were their outcomes?
Yitzhak Abergil, the main figure, ultimately pleaded guilty to racketeering in May 2012.
Racketeering, that's basically running an ongoing criminal enterprise, right? Not just one crime.
Exactly, a pattern of illegal activities. He was sentenced to 10 years, including time already served, with the rest to be served back in Israel, as agreed.
Okay. What about Malul?
Moshe Malul pleaded guilty to racketeering conspiracy. He admitted involvement in the conspiracy to murder Sammy Attias and the conspiracy to import ecstasy. Got 15 years in June 2012.
15 years. And Ozifa.
Israel Ozifa pleaded guilty to conspiracy to import ecstasy, sentenced to 8 years in July 2012.
And Sesson Bereshi.
He went to trial, apparently, found guilty of racketeering conspiracy in January 2013, sentenced to 4.5 years.
So a range of outcomes there in the U.S. Plea deals, a conviction at trial.
Those plea agreements and convictions in the U.S. represent a significant legal victory for American authorities. Prosecuting the Abergil organization's activities on U.S. soil, the different sentences likely reflect different levels of involvement, maybe cooperation.
Right. Finally, we need to talk about Case 512 back in Israel. This seems like the big one, domestically.
It really does. Kicked off in 2015 with a large-scale operation, lots of arrests targeting serious organized crime.
And an indictment was filed in July 2015 against 18 defendants. With Yitzhak Abergil, even while, dealing with his U.S. sentence in return, still identified as the lead figure.
Along with his alleged right-hand man, Yaniv Ben Simon, who was caught later, right, in South Africa.
Yeah, I think that's right. Caught much later in 2022. So Abergil was accused in Israel of running a criminal organization, large-scale international drug trafficking.
And the violence again.
Oh, yeah. Some defendants implicated in violent crimes, including murders of innocent civilians. This really seems like the culmination of a major effort by Israeli law enforcement to dismantle the organization at its core.
Case 512 does indeed appear to be the result of years of intensive investigation in Israel, aimed at that central structure, holding leadership accountable for the whole spectrum of alleged crimes, both in Israel and internationally.
And the indictment specifically detailed that violent conflict between the Abergils and Ziv Rosenstein's group.
The rivalry that kept coming up.
Yeah. And tragically, that conflict resulted in the deaths of 3 civilians in that bombing attack intended for Rosenstein.
Just awful collateral damage.
The court ultimately convicted Yitzhak Abergil in 2021. Convicted him of attempted murder, conspiracy, the murder of those 3 innocent bystanders in the Rosenstein attempt, and significantly of heading a criminal organization.
That conviction for heading a criminal organization itself, on top of the other serious charges, that's a crucial step legally, recognizing and addressing the leadership and structure of these groups within Israel.
And including the bystander deaths really underscores the devastating impact these criminal wars have on the public.
Absolutely.
In the sentencing, June 2022 reflected that gravity. Severe. 3 life sentences, plus an additional 30 years.
Wow.
The court's description was powerful, too. They called the bombing a cruel plan, equated it to terrorist attacks, and labeled it one of the most serious incidents in the history of wars between criminal organizations in Israel.
That statement from the court, it really brings home the level of violence and the profound impact the Abergil organization allegedly had on Israeli society. Comparing it to terrorism highlights the perceived threat to public safety.
So, okay, let's try to wrap this up briefly. To summarize what we've covered, we've seen the Abergil organization emerge in the 90s, evolve into this alleged international criminal enterprise, involved in a huge range of illegal activities.
Characterized by both that extreme violence and surprisingly sophisticated operational methods.
Right. We've looked at the intense coordinated law enforcement efforts, U.S., Israel, other countries, leading to significant arrests, extraditions, major trials, culminating in that landmark Case 512. Through all of this, hopefully you, the listener, now have a much clearer picture of the complexity, the extensive reach, and the impact of this organization based on the information we've explored.
It's quite a story, spanning continents, covering so many criminal activities, intense rivalries, and the determined efforts of law enforcement to ultimately try and dismantle it.
And as you can see, the Abergil organization's story provides a compelling, maybe unsettling, but certainly a useful case study in the complexities of international organized crime today.
The modern era, yeah.
Which kind of leads us to a final point for you to consider. Given the truly international reach of the Abergil organization and these extensive, multifaceted legal battles across the U.S. and Israel, what does their story ultimately tell us about the ongoing evolving challenges of effectively combating global organized crime in the 21st century?
That's a big question.
It is. It seems clear that even with significant resources, lots of international cooperation, these deeply entrenched, highly adaptable networks still pose a persistent threat.
Indeed. It raises important questions, doesn't it? About the changing nature of organized crime in our interconnected world, and what long-term strategies are really needed to disrupt and dismantle these complex criminal entities.
Something to think about. We encourage you to keep thinking about this, maybe explore further the ongoing efforts to address global organized crime.